Coming up on this episode of A Crime Most Queer. Alex takes a step forward and smiles, his hand outstretched. But Brian's expression changes, his face suddenly menacing, and a crazed look in his eye. Alex stops dead, not fully understanding what the hell is going on. Then suddenly Brian breaks into a sprint. As he approaches, he raises his hand, and for the first time, Alex sees the knife.
More today's news now, and police were called to an area near to Parbold Hill yesterday evening. It's not known if the body is that of a woman or a man.
The CCTV coverage clearly shows a young man on a black mountain bike riding past the restaurant at 2:30 in the afternoon in the direction of Parbold, and the same man heading back in the opposite direction at 3:59.
We'll start again. Are you responsible for the murder of Alex Davies?
No comment.
Do you remember going there on Monday at all?
No
For
comment.
any reason?
No comment.
Are you responsible for murdering Alex Davies?
No comment.
Hey folks, welcome. If you're new here, I'm NJ. What we do here is discuss true crime with a queer twist. So, both LGBTQ related and kind of weird. In today's episode, we're tackling the brutal stabbing of Alex Davies, which, as will become apparent, I've titled Overkill. It was again written by Sharon Hoff, so thanks Sharon. This is a wild one, and it absolutely qualifies as a crime most queer. Not because there's much intrigue in this case, but because it just doesn't make sense. The violence was so overwhelmingly disproportional to the situation. This is the first of many cases I'm going to be covering in the coming months that deals with the dating app Grindr. Maybe it's the way of the world today, but so many cases I come across include the words to the effect of, "They met on Grindr," and things really have a happy ending. First, let's get the housekeeping out of the way. Why not hit that subscribe button? And please like the video. It goes a long way in getting our content into the algorithm. Also, share your thoughts in the comments. I would love to hear from you. If you're here for the premiere, I'm over in the live chat. Come and join me. If you didn't catch the premiere but you want to catch the next one, you can get notified when we drop new videos by subscribing to the channel and ringing the bell. And that's it for the housekeeping, for now. So let's dive in, shall we?
Crime Most Queer is an LGBTQ true crime podcast intended for adult audiences and may contain graphic or disturbing content, including detailed descriptions of violence, physical or sexual assault, injuries to victims, and foul language. If you feel this may trigger you at all, please reconsider listening.
What follows is based on true events, as gleaned from court records, press reports and published interviews of people involved. While much care has been taken to ensure that this is as accurate a retelling of the events as possible, some people, places, situations, interactions and conversations may have been invented for dramatic or storytelling purposes. Hey, before we get going, I just want to talk to you about our awesome sponsor DreamStream. As you know, I record almost all of my videos here at DreamStream, and the professionalism is beyond compare. They're all about video production, live streaming, podcasts and music. And they bring your projects to life with world-class equipment and experienced professionals, whether in their studio or out in the wild. From a state-of-the-art recording studio to high-end mixing and mastering tools, they've got it all. The studio itself offers a cozy and creative environment, making you feel right at home with various set options. Look, you've seen my episodes, and if you haven't, you're watching one right now. Go and compare my very first video that I did at home to the videos that have come out since. The difference is chalk and cheese. So, if you're serious about your production, check out dreamstream.coza. A huge thanks to DreamStream for supporting this video and the South African creator community. Now, let's get back into it. Prologue, Alder Covert. It's a typical spring afternoon in the English countryside. It's the 1st of May 2019, and the blossoms strike a bold contrast against the bare trees still recovering from the winter's harshness. The evergreen thickets around the secluded Alder Covert atop Parbold Hill, which overlooks the quaint, quiet village of Parbold in northwest Lancashire, nestled between the larger cities of Chorley to the northeast and Skelmersdale to the southwest, add to the natural beauty of the area. Gamekeeper Daniel Hankey loves his job, and he's particularly fond of this breathtaking meadow, vibrant with colour and filled with the gentle hum of insects carried on the breeze. He adores being out, doing his usual rounds at this time of day, with the sun sinking slowly in the west, and his faithful dog Kieva by his side. Quite satisfied that all is in order, Daniel whistles for Kieva to come to heel. Ordinarily, she would give up on the hapless woodland creature she's pestering, scamper out from underneath the bushes, and bound over to him. But not today. Today she's clearly intrigued by the discovery she's made, and stubbornly refuses to come when called, instead choosing to bark incessantly at whatever has her attention. Thinking of something caught in a trap, Daniel clambers under the low-hanging tree limbs to see what has her so enthralled. The first thing he notices is a pile of broken conifer branches amid a copse of trees, which instantly gets his back up. That eyesore could easily become a magnet for all sorts of vermin. It's almost 5:30 p.m, and he's looking forward to getting home for tea, but he decides to see if he can sort out the unsightly mess. But as he nears the tangled pile, he notices something protruding out from underneath the foliage. At first, he can't be certain what it is he's seeing, and he pauses, trying to figure out what's under there. Suddenly it clicks, and he reels back in horror. He knows exactly what that is, and he grabs Kieva by the collar and pulls her back. The last thing he needs is for her to disturb the scene. Scrambling back out into the open, still with his hand tightly gripping Kieva's collar, he pulls his mobile phone from his pocket and places a call to 111. Kieva struggles to break free, but Daniel holds firm, barely aware of the impromptu tug-of-war he's suddenly engaged in. When the call is answered, Daniel knows that now is not the time for pleasantries, and the first words out of his mouth are, "There's a body, a human one." Chapter 1. Skem. Skelmersdale, or Skem as it is more popularly known by the locals, is reputed to be a town unlike any other. It is a large, old-fashioned industrial town which, as with most of Lancashire County, relies heavily on the tourist trade. If nothing else, the northwest has incredible scenery. The majestic hills, the tranquil valleys, the meandering rivers, one of which is the River Tord, which runs through the town itself. And it all adds up to make this corner of the world a must-see place on any bucket list. Skem is an old town, dating back to Roman times, which rose from the ashes of the coal mining days. Due to the lack of safety regulations and subsequent restrictions imposed by the Thatcher government, much of the mining activity came to a halt in the 80s, and many found themselves unemployed, causing an economic crisis, like many other towns in England. Although Skem progressed with time, transforming into a flourishing industrial region, rising costs and lack of good management saw many factories either close, downsize, or move to greener pastures. The economy, and in turn the townsfolk, suffered once again. They were still reeling from the effects of the mining industry loss, and this just added to their woes. They turned their attention to becoming a market town and tourist attraction, and it became an overflow for nearby bustling cities like Liverpool. Not a particularly affluent town, Skem boasts a struggling population with a gradually rising unemployment rate. Jobs are scarce, and there are few opportunities for young school leavers. They are bored and frustrated, and there is very little in the way of nightlife to be found, except maybe for a few local pubs dotted around. As such, they become a problem. Without skills development, they struggle to find meaningful employment, and end up mostly hanging out in these pubs and causing mayhem wherever they go. Not everyone is in the same boat though. There are some who are actively working to improve their lot. One fortunate, hard-working young man is 18-year-old Alex Davies, described by his friends and family as a gentle, kind-hearted and hard-working chap who would never have harmed anyone. As a teen, he was active in volunteer work and is now employed as a sales assistant at Home Bargains, a variety chain store with branches across the UK. At school, he endured bullying due to his soft nature and the fact that he didn't quite fit in with people his own age. He was a fan of ABBA and the Bee Gees, and he loved trains, particularly the British Rail Class 142 Pacer. He would spend hours just sitting on the platform, watching their comings and goings, and he even adopted the username Pacer for his online blog and when interacting in internet forums. But despite all the ill treatment he was subjected to by his peers, he has risen above it all to become his own person. He is openly gay and not at all shy about his sexuality. He has a close-knit group of friends who attest to him always being there for them. He takes pride in his job and enjoys helping customers, assisting the elderly and ably challenged to carry their purchases to their cars, and generally keeping everything orderly. Everyone he meets is struck by his kindness and gentle nature. He is already working his way up the ranks, having recently been promoted. Most of all, he revels in having his independence at last. He is determined to save up enough so that he can finally leave this godforsaken dead-end town that is Skem. He wants to get out there and see the world, to experience new, bigger and better things. But there is another thing that he yearns for, possibly more than anything else. He longs to find that special someone who will sweep him off his feet and love him like he's the only person in the world. Being 18 years old and living in a town not known for a vibrant queer community that offers a plethora of eligible young men, he turns to the next best thing and creates a profile on Grindr, a gay dating app, kind of like Tinder, although Grindr came first. And that, I'm afraid, is where the trouble starts. Chapter 2. Chorley. Like Skelmersdale, the market town of Chorley also has a long and storied past. The beautiful rolling hills, lush landscapes and rich watered lowlands provides the perfect setting for agriculture and livestock husbandry, and the area enjoys a busy tourist industry. Chorley survives on out-of-towners visiting the local sites, which provide an outlet for the local farmers and home industries to sell their wares. As with Skem, Chorley faces the same battles with unemployment and a struggling economy, and the youth are forever wishing they could leave this dead-in-the-water place for the bright lights and high life of the big city, but opportunities are scarce. Back in 2007, Mr. and Mrs. Hearless decided to make the quaint little town their home, but not much is known about the family, other than the fact that they moved from Lithuania with their 2 sons. This is rather curious, if I'm honest. Usually, researching the victim is a challenge because the media coverage focuses almost entirely on the perpetrator, while the victim becomes a footnote in their own story. This case, however, is the other way around, which may explain why I've only found one other documentary on this case, and press coverage is surprisingly limited. As such, I've had to take some liberties in piecing together the fragments I've found on the life of Brian Hearless, the younger of the 2 Hearless brothers, in order to paint a picture for the purpose of our story. Brian's childhood was difficult, and he found it particularly hard when his parents moved into the UK at the age of 7 to settle down and make friends. The language barrier proved a significant challenge, and so he mostly kept to himself. He wasn't a huge fan of school, but he found that he enjoyed tinkering with technology, and he spent most of his time at home, in his room, on his computer, generally doing his own thing. Over the years, he withdraws more and more to the point that he even stops spending time with his family, choosing instead to take his dinner in his room. Scholastically, he's not a great student, and he would only go on to achieve a single GCSE, the equivalent of passing a single subject in matric here in South Africa, before trying to make a go of life in the real world. But he doesn't have much success there either. As mentioned before, Chorley is no differently affected by the suffering economy as the rest of the world, and being a market and tourist town, work is scarce. Being alone with just his thoughts to comfort him becomes the norm for Brian, with him occupying his time at his computer, either playing video games, researching random facts on a variety of topics, watching horror movies or crime documentaries. Compared to the life of youngsters subjected to the lockdowns and social distancing measures brought about by the pandemic, Brian's life looks no different to those other teens in 2020, but this is 2019, and the pandemic is still a year away. Alone in his room, his interests start to take a dark turn. His internet search history is awash with questions like, how much force would be necessary to break a skull? What should be taken off a murder victim? How do you destroy evidence taken from the crime scene? And what should you wear and take with you to commit a murder? Interesting stuff. As his fascination with the macabre grows, so too does his interest in ways to find one's victims. The digital age serves those up on a silver platter. Dating apps. He doesn't have a particular sexual preference, but perhaps he figures that in a world where violence against women gets a lot of media attention, gay men, who often hide their sexuality from society, would make easier targets. And so he signs up on Grindr and begins browsing the menu, so to speak. And it is here that he happens upon the profile of a good-looking chap, just 1 year older than himself, going by the name of Pacer. The innocent face, the gentle nature, maybe this one will make for an interesting first foray into the dark side. And so, he makes contact. Chapter 3. Parbold. Before we dive in, let's take a look at the little village of Parbold. It grew up around several small scattered agricultural communities in the valley of the River Douglas, with its origins dating back to the late 12th century. It was a farming community for much of its early days, but not much remains of that Parbold except 2 stone houses, Common House and Manor Cottage. When thin coal seams were discovered near the settlement in the 17 and 1800s, Parbold transitioned into a mining community with several small coal mines supported by 3 collieries springing up around the village. Hard sandstone, which is resistant to erosion and upon which Parbold is built, was also quarried, which too transformed the landscape. This, together with the coal, was transported by boat via the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, which runs through the town. Parbold village is dominated by Parbold Hill, the top of which, at 120 metres above sea level, offers stunning views of the West Lancashire Plain and over the northwest of England to Liverpool, Manchester and Wales. It is a popular tourist attraction that offers various walks frequented by the locals and visitors alike, and every February, Parbold Hill plays host to the Parbold Hill Race, a challenging cross-country obstacle course that takes full advantage of the steep gradient, fences, rivulets and mud puddles to really push competitors to their limits. But afterwards, everyone gets to head to the Miller and Carter Steakhouse near the top of the hill to satisfy their hunger and grab a pint while they take in the spectacular views. Although one could be mistaken for thinking that Parbold is developing fast, it is not, at least not on a scale as large as other towns in Lancashire. It is still just a quaint village of around 2,500 people with a stone railway station building, 2 churches, 2 primary schools, a nursery school, a library, the village hall, which doubles as a community centre and sometimes a cinema, a doctor's surgery, pharmacist, news agent, estate agent, some takeaways and small family-owned shops, a greengrocer, 3 hairdressers, and a handful of pubs and restaurants. But while Parbold may be what some may call stuck in the mud, it was hailed by Armistead Barnett in his article Parbold, Why I Love My Village, as being a beautiful place to call home. Now let's get back to the story. Over in Chorley, an idea has begun to form in Brian's head, but he needs to make sure that he has everything planned out perfectly. He's not ready. Not yet, at least. He knows what his end goal is, and over the next few days, he works on his strategy. He needs a victim. Grindr should help with that. He needs a meeting place. Not too far, but not in Chorley. Somewhere private, with no witnesses. Parbold Hill should suit his needs. He needs a weapon. He can probably rummage up a knife from the kitchen that'll do the job. He needs to know what to remove from the scene. Well, that's what Google is for. Lastly, he needs a reliable escape route and mode of transportation. He can probably get in and out on his bicycle. It's not that far. He also researches how to sever all connections with the person once the deed is done. Deleting the chat should solve that, but just in case, he'll need to take their phone and do a factory reset. Clearly server backups are not something that a 17-year-old thinks about. With his plan, more or less laid out, he logs onto Grindr, and over in Skem, Alex hears a familiar sound. Their conversation is mostly about mundane things. Where they each stay, what they do for a living, their likes, their dislikes, what kind of phones they have. Alex seems friendly and quite happy to talk about himself. He's also fairly interested in learning of Brian's story. But Brian doesn't reveal much from his side, save for revealing that he hasn't come out yet. Brian then asks if Alex is out to his family and friends, and Alex responds that yes, he's pretty open and honest about his sexual orientation. To which Brian responds that when they do meet, he prefers somewhere secluded, where they could snuggle while looking at the view, without the risk of Brian being recognized. Alex doesn't seem unamenable to this, and it doesn't take Brian long to suggest a meeting place. Seeing as the village of Parbold was almost midway between Skelmersdale and Chorley, maybe they could meet there. They didn't set up an exact meeting place, but agree to play by ear when they both get into the village. We usually judge by our own standards, especially when we're young. Before interacting with humans teaches us to be a little bit more cautious and skeptical. And to Brian, this Alex kid seemed nice, gentle and kind-hearted. So the ever-trusting Alex agrees to the meeting in Parbold on Monday, the 29th of April, 2019, at 2 p.m. He looks forward to the encounter, but for whatever reason, Alex decides against telling his friends or family about Brian. Maybe he wants to see if there could be a future between them first. Maybe he's trying to protect Brian's privacy. Perhaps he just wants to wait until he has more information to share, and maybe even introduce Brian to them. Whatever the reason, as the day approaches, Alex's excitement grows, but he doesn't say a word. At 13:42, CCTV cameras near Parbold Station catch Alex getting out of a taxi, and he can be seen heading down Station Road into Mill Lane. There he stops in at a corner shop and buys a chocolate and a cool drink. After leaving the shop, the cameras lose him, but he's picked up a little while later on Lancashire Lane, making his way to Parbold Hill Road and the rendezvous point that the boys agree on after Alex arrives from Skem. Brian is late, and as Alex waits, he starts wondering whether perhaps Brian has had second thoughts about the meeting. He looks around and realizes that the location certainly is discreet. There is absolutely no one else in sight. And he starts to doubt his trusting nature. Maybe he's been too trusting, and this guy's been pulling his leg all along. He's heard that some arseholes on Grindr think that shit is funny, and he's not unfamiliar with the dicks of the world. His youth may have made him naive, sure, but his years of dealing with school bullies had made him realize that some people aren't worth your time or energy. It's now 2:30, and Brian still hasn't arrived. Alex scans the field and still doesn't see anybody. This place unnerves him. It'll be dark soon, and he would be a target for anyone with nefarious intent. Perhaps he should have told his mum, or at least his friends, where he was going before he left. His mum had warned him about those dating sites, drawing particular attention to news coverage of the case involving Stephen Port, aka the Grindr killer down in London a few years ago. But it's the kind of shit you only see on the news. It doesn't happen to people you know. And that, boys and girls, is what we call foreshadowing. Alex decides to give Brian one last chance and texts him to find out where he is. Alex tells him that he's waiting at the arranged spot and even sends a pic of what he can see to help Brian pinpoint his location. Brian responds almost immediately, which puts Alex's mind at ease, but he still wishes he didn't have to stand alone in this deserted area. It's not long before he notices someone approaching at a brisk pace. As Brian cycles up to the gate leading into the field below the wooded area atop Parbold Hill, he notices, to his relief, that the place is indeed quite deserted. He cautiously wheels his bike through the gate and props it up against the stone wall that surrounds the field. He doesn't see anyone as he scans the trees looking for Alex, and when the message notification sounds, it startles him, and he snatches his phone from his pocket. It's Alex. He's asking Brian where he is. and says that he's waiting. A pic of what Alex can see follows, and Brian can see that it is exactly the kind of secluded area he had been hoping for. Good. Brian responds with 4 words. "I'll come get you." Who knows if those words, the way he phrased it, were unintended situational irony, or whether he smiled sardonically at his clever play on words. But either way, he closes in on his prey. As he rounds a cluster of trees, he sees a young man waiting near the tree line at the far end of the field, and he hastily makes his way in that direction. As he strides up the hill, he slowly draws the knife. As Brian draws nearer, Alex smiles at him, trying to ignore the fleeting thought that darts through his mind. Why does Brian look more serious than he ought to? Maybe he's just nervous. Chapter 4, 128. Alex takes a step forward and smiles, his hand outstretched. But Brian's expression changes, his face suddenly menacing, and a crazed look in his eye. Alex stops dead, not fully understanding what the hell is going on. Then suddenly Brian breaks into a sprint. As he approaches, he raises his hand, and for the first time, Alex sees the knife. Before Alex can even react, the blade enters his chest. Then again, and again, in a vicious frenzy. Alex tries to defend himself, but Brian headbutts him in the face, breaking his nose, and Alex's vision blurs as the crack reverberates inside his skull. But he keeps trying to fend off his attacker. His breath's coming in gasps. Alex can taste blood running down his throat and feels it splattering all over his and his attacker's clothes. Brian appears to be mumbling something to himself, although Alex can't make it out, but that is of little consequence in the moment, as this crazy fuck keeps on stabbing him repeatedly. The next thing Alex knows, he is headbutted again, and his blurred vision takes on a red hue. He collapses to the ground, face down, gasping in pain and panic as he prays that the assault is finally over. Brian has no idea how many times he plunged the knife into Alex. He was too busy thrusting the knife like a crazy person to bother with counting. But now that his frenzy is over, he looks down at Alex's blood-spattered body lying on the ground, wondering if he needs to continue. Alex, however, isn't moving, so he figures it's safe to stop. He looks around to make sure he hasn't been observed, but thankfully there is still no one in sight. He pegs the knife into the soft, muddy soil up to the hilt and looks down at Alex again. Can't just leave him here, out in the open. He needs to hide the body. Seconds seem like minutes to Alex, and he assumes that Brian will take his belongings and leave. This is not the first time that Alex has been mugged. He knows the drill. Don't resist. Give them what they want, and they will fuck off soon enough. But then he feels Brian grab his ankles. As he's dragged through the brush, mud and mulch fill his nose and mouth, and his chest burns as his lungs beg for air. Brian drags his victim face down through the trees and away from the path, as Alex struggles in his fight for air. But Brian doesn't care. He has a job to do and he needs to do it. Alex is bigger than he expected, and Brian's progress is slower than he would like. But finally, he spots a slight depression in the earth, and he drags Alex in that direction. Alex begins to feel himself slipping into unconsciousness, and his final lucid thought is of his mum. He really wishes he had told her where he was going. Then, darkness. Now that Alex lies still and silent, Brian sets about relieving him of his phone, wallet, headphones and backpack. His Google searches were informative, and he knows to leave as few identifiers on or around Alex as possible. He then tears branches off a nearby conifer and haphazardly covers Alex's body. Doesn't have to be perfect, just not obvious to any casual passerby that there is something worth investigating. At least not until the wildlife has had its fill and the elements had done their thing. Then identifying the body will be practically impossible, apparently. Once he is certain that he has sufficiently covered up Alex, he goes in search of the knife. But stabbing it into the ground, like he had been an error, Eventually he concedes that it has been lost to the mud, and he dashes back to his bike, where he gathers himself and takes a few deep breaths to flush the adrenaline from his system. After another final check to make sure there aren't any witnesses around, he dons the backpack full of his loot, mounts his bike, and calmly rides away, retracing his steps back to Chorley. It is unclear, or at least we couldn't find any mention of it, whether he had a double layer of clothing on and peeled off the blood-soaked layer before setting off. But if he hadn't, cycling along a public road in bloody clothes would have taken some balls. Chapter 5. 7 Days. When Brian gets home, the first thing he does is reset Alex's phone, as he told himself to do as soon as he knew what phone Alex used. He then logs onto Grindr and blocks Pacer, which in turn deletes the chat between them. He then takes a shower to wash any evidence of the afternoon's escapades down the drain and goes about his evening. A few hours later, Brian is lying on his bed, running through the events of the day in his mind. We can only assume that he is feeling quite impressed at his achievements. His fantasies are now reality. But there's always room for improvement, and the only way he's going to improve is by doing it again. Practice makes perfect, after all. And with that, he logs onto Grindr once more. Over the course of the next few hours, Brian initiates chats with 4 other men on the app. One of them, a guy going by the name of Matt, piques his interest more than the others. Following the same playbook as he had with Alex, he again keeps the conversation light and unassuming. Where are you from? What do you do for work? What do you do for fun? What are you into? What aren't you keen on? What kind of phone do you have? Yep. Again with the phone thing. Like the dude's building up a collection or something. Look, I know you're into tech and shit, my guy, but really, there are easier fucking ways to get a phone. Anyway, Matt and Brian make plans to meet up later that week. As far as he knows, there's nothing tying him to Alex. But, like we said, there's always room for improvement. So while he researches Matt's phone over the next few days, he also Googles where to get his hand on other equipment. Specifically, a folding shovel, like the military uses. He hadn't thought about that before, and it would, he reckons, make getting rid of the body a whole lot easier. Also, a folding spade would be easy enough to conceal, and they aren't that expensive, just a few quid. He smiles to himself, proud of the fact that he's really getting the hang of this, honing his craft, if you will. But wait, we need to go back a bit. First, let me be clear here. The press coverage on this case is scant, to say the least. And to get Alex's mother, Beverly Davies' story, we had to rely heavily on a single episode of a documentary series produced by MTV, True Life Crime UK, which, according to the presenter, Linda Aday, is the first, and from what I can tell, the only time Bev has told her story on camera. In fact, this is the only coverage of the case we could find outside of newspaper reporting. With that said, let's go. When Bev gets home from work on Monday evening, she discovers that Alex is not in. As night falls, the sense of unease she is feeling, but can't explain, intensifies. By 9 p.m, her disquiet has turned to full-blown worry, and she calls Alex's best friend, Leon, to find out if he has heard from Alex. When he tells her that he has not, she contacts more of Alex's friends, but their answer is the same. The following morning, Bev heads over to the Skelmersdale police station to report that she believes her son is missing. But frustratingly, they dismiss her concerns as teens will teen. But Bev isn't buying it. Alex disappearing like this is completely out of character, and his friends agree. So even though the police agree to open a missing persons case, Bev decides that if the cops are only going to do the bare minimum, she'll do some investigating of her own. Her first port of call is her CCTV system, which caught Alex leaving the house and getting into a taxi on Monday afternoon. Thankfully, both the company name and vehicle registration number are visible in the footage, and she gives them a call. After explaining who she is and while she's calling, they reluctantly reveal that Alex was dropped outside Parbold station. That allows Bev to focus her search, but being a civilian, this proves challenging. Unbeknownst to Bev, however, another division of the Lancashire Constabulary, the Force Major Investigation Team, is about to enter the fray. When Detective Sergeant Ian Derbyshire arrives at the Skelmersdale police station on Wednesday morning, the 1st of May 2019, he's expecting an uneventful day. Sure, every day that starts out uneventful has the potential to go pear-shaped at any moment, but this bright, sunny day doesn't give off any indication of there being shenanigans afoot. He finds immense satisfaction in his work. One of the areas he's assigned to is the village of Parbold. It's a small town, but besides the odd local leaving the pub a bit under the weather, or the odd instance of shoplifting, or an unruly gathering disturbing the peace late at night, overall, it's fairly tranquil. It's a quiet village where everybody knows everybody, and besides the occasional tourist wandering through on their way up Parbold Hill to take in the magnificent views, there's not much in the line of strangers. His day is fairly routine. Paperwork, meetings, paperwork, lunch, paperwork, tea, almost home time, packing up, and then the phone rings. As he grunts in acknowledgement of what the caller is telling him, he jots down the highlights of the call on the notepad next to the phone. Human remains, Parbold Hill, Alder Covert, Daniel Hankey, branches and leaves. With a curt, got it, DS Derbyshire drops the phone back onto its cradle, grabs what he needs, and rushes for the door. As he passes a constable in the hallway, he pauses briefly to pass on a message. We have a body. Parbold Hill. Tell the chief. On his arrival at the foot of Parbold Hill, Derbyshire spots a man standing near the tree line, waving wildly at him with one hand while restraining a dog with the other. Derbyshire pulls his vehicle onto the field and parks at the start of the pathway leading into the woods, near where the man is standing. Well, more accurately, was standing, because even before Derbyshire can get out of his car, the chap starts walking towards the trees, gesturing for the detective to follow as he relates his story, totally ignorant as to whether Derbyshire can hear him or not. Derbyshire hurries after the old man and his dog, trying to keep up both with the old codger, who is surprisingly nimble for his age, and his frenetically relayed version of events. As they wend their way through the trees and circumnavigate the puddles of mud, Derbyshire learns that the old man is the same Daniel Hankey he was told to meet, that Daniel is the groundskeeper here, and that he was doing his rounds when Kiever, it took Derbyshire a few seconds to figure out that Kiever is the dog, was drawn to something in the foliage. Try as he might, Daniel couldn't get her to heel, so he went in to check what had her so interested. That's when he saw an arm sticking out from the detritus piled up under the tree. He didn't disturb anything, he assures Derbyshire, and he made sure that Kiever didn't either, or at least no more than she already had. And that's when he called the police. The closer they get to the discovery, the more rattled Daniel seems to get, until finally he refuses to go any further and merely waves in the direction of a pile of plant litter. It doesn't look big enough to hide a body, but Derbyshire approaches with caution nevertheless, although he doesn't have to go too far in to be able to clearly see an arm protruding from the pile. The detective scrambles out from beneath the brush and races off down the path back towards his vehicle, hollering over his shoulder that Daniel isn't to touch anything, leaving the old man to mutter under his breath that he wasn't planning on it. He didn't even want to go near it. In the distance, the sound of sirens can be heard approaching. After what seemed like an age, but is probably no more than a few minutes, 2 more vehicles round the corner and drive up the quiet lane. First to arrive is Detective Chief Inspector Jeff Hurst. As he clambers out of his vehicle, he is joined by additional police personnel, all hurriedly summoned as DCI Hurst left the station, and they follow Derbyshire as he leads them through the trees towards the crime scene. The detective stands back as the forensic team gets to work, carefully removing the branches and leaves to expose the body. And when it eventually is, seasoned investigators gasp at the extent of the injuries. Initially, the body is believed to be that of a young woman. So totally unrecognizable it is, caked in blood, mud and filth. But the pathologist, wisely, decides it best to hold off on making any final determinations until the autopsy. Meanwhile, DCI Hurst instructs his team to fingertip search the area without disturbing anything for fear of destroying evidence. The entire west side of Parbold Hill is a crime scene. Officers turn up a driver's license and Tesco's club card, discarded in the grass, which may or may not belong to the victim or the perpetrator, but it's too soon to tell. Sometime later, as the day turns from dusk into night, there is a shout from between the trees, "Sir, we've got something here." Making his way carefully to the edge of the clearing from whence the shout had come, DCI Hurst gives the officer a questioning look, and the officer points to the ground. There, barely protruding out of the ground, is the hilt of a knife. A member of the forensic team is called over, and the knife is carefully extracted from the muddy soil, revealing it to be a black-handled kitchen knife, like one would buy as part of a set at any number of grocery stores. Officers also notice what appears to be a mix of blood and mud on the blade. They also recover jewellery, possibly coming from the body, all of which is carefully bagged and tagged. Back at the station, a Category A homicide case is opened, and it looks like it promises to be an extremely challenging investigation. Owing to the discreet location, the lack of witnesses, or the absence of any CCTV cameras trained on the area, it seems like investigators are in for an uphill battle. DCI Hurst instructs one of his team to look into any missing persons reports that may have come in the past few days, and this leads them to a report filed the day before. In the photograph attached to the report, DCI Hurst notices something. The jewellery found at the scene matches jewellery being worn by this missing person. Added to this, the name of this missing person matches the name of the cards found at the scene, Alex Davies. When the pathologist's report arrives later in the evening, it's revealed that the victim is in fact male and exhibited a total of 146 injuries, 128 of them stab wounds, inflicted with a blade similar to the one found at the scene. The brutality of the attack is astounding, but the cruelest of ironies is saved for the cause of death. The victim didn't die as a result of the injuries inflicted, but rather from asphyxiation, due to being dragged face down through the mud and the leaves, which blocked his nose and mouth. When word gets out of a body discovered on Parbold Hill, it is the talk of the town. How could something like this happen in a place like Parbold? It strikes fear into the locals because it could have been any one of them, or worse, one of their children. When Alex doesn't pitch up for his work shift on Thursday afternoon, concerns for his well-being spreads to his work colleagues, and the Skelmersdale branch of Home Bargains puts out an appeal on their Facebook page for anyone with information to come forward. It doesn't take long for the news of the body found in Parbold Hill to reach Alex's manager, and he calls Bev to let her know. However, he reassures her, from what he's heard, the victim is older than Alex, and it may also be a woman, much to Bev's relief. That relief, however, is short-lived, when that evening officers arrive at Bev's door to break the tragic news. Understandably, this is absolutely devastating. She cannot make sense of the fact that Alex went out without telling anyone. She puts investigators in contact with Alex's closest friends, who all attest to the fact that he hadn't said a word to any of them. They also say that he had no enemies that they know of. Everybody loved him. They can't believe that this has happened. They add that, as he was quite a big build, his attacker must have been bigger and stronger, like a bodybuilder or something, which is a conclusion shared by the task team. The police are stumped. The evidence they have to work with isn't getting them any closer to identifying their culprit, and on Friday morning, Detective Superintendent Andy Cribbins appeals to the public for any information that can aid in the investigation.
I'm here at Parbold Hill at the scene of Alex's murder. I'm making a direct appeal to the public to ask for your help. I'm asking for anybody who knows Alex and may have known why he was in the Parbold area earlier this week, or any concerns or any information they feel could help us at all, to contact us and let us know. I'm asking to anybody who was in Parbold at the time, on Monday the 29th of April until Wednesday the 1st of May, who may have seen Alex in the area or seen any suspicious activity, to contact the police and let us know. And finally, I'm asking if you know anybody who's been acting strangely or out of character since Wednesday of this week, or who's got any unexplained injuries, or who may have some blood-stained clothing, please contact Lancashire Police and let us know so we can investigate that.
They also take a look at Alex's phone records, and here they make an interesting discovery. On Monday the 29th, there is a single call to a landline, which they discover is a number registered to a home in Chorley. When they call the number, they match it to a name of a person of interest, a name that matches fingerprints found at the scene, Brian Heelis. This is the break in the case they've been hoping for. Upon arrival at the Heelis home that afternoon, armed with a search warrant, they meet Brian, a tall, slender male of just 17 years of age. If this boy is their perpetrator, their theory of the attacker is totally blown out of the water. He could not be further from what investigators are expecting. They search the house for clues, and in Brian's room they discover Alex's rucksack, headphones, mobile phone and wallet, all of which they seize. Officers take Brian in for questioning, but apart from denying that he had killed Alex, he refuses to answer any other questions. Lancashire Police put out a media statement asking for any information from passers-by or motorists who may have dashcam footage on the area surrounding Parbold Hill between 1 and 5:30 on the afternoon of the 29th of April. And this turns up what would turn out to be a vital piece of evidence. Remember the restaurant we mentioned back at the top of chapter 3, the Miller and Carter Steakhouse? Well, here's the funny thing about the UK. While not the most surveilled country in the world, it's way up there. With a population of just over 68 million people and over 6 million cameras keeping eyes on them, it has more surveillance cameras per capita than any other country in the world except for China. And when you compare the land area and population difference between the UK and China, that's pretty fucking mental. London alone is the most surveilled city outside of Asia, where they have almost 400 cameras per square kilometre. Granted, Parbold is not London, but here's a suggestion for any of you out there in the audience considering a life of crime. Maybe don't do it in the UK. You're probably going to get your mug on candid camera. Parbold isn't London, like I said, but it's still in the UK. A quick scoping out of the Miller and Carter Steakhouse on Google Street View shows that stretch of Sparrow Hill Road is awash with surveillance. The CCTV coverage clearly shows a young man on a black mountain bike riding past the restaurant at 2:30 in the afternoon in the direction of Parbold, and the same man heading back in the opposite direction at 3:59. The most interesting observation investigators make is that on the way there, it's just a boy on a bike, but on the way back, he is now sporting a backpack. A backpack, they note, that is identical to the one Alex was last seen with, slung over his shoulder as he walked away from Parbold Station, and it was not found at the scene. Getting any information off Alex's phone is a bust, because Brian wiped it as soon as he got home. But Brian's phone and social media proved to be a wealth of information. Police learned that Alex and Brian met on Grindr the week prior. The conversation is initially friendly, and then it turns flirtatious, and ultimately they arranged to meet on Monday afternoon. They also learn that Brian is the one who suggested a secluded spot because he claims he's not out, aka he's still in the closet. The final communication between them is the text exchange at 2:30 on the 29th, when Alex messages Brian to let him know that he's waiting for him. And Brian replies with those chilling, in hindsight, 4 words, "I'll come get you." Finally, they have the evidence that connects Alex and Brian. They also discover Brian's conversation with Matt and realize with horror that he was likely grooming yet another victim on Grindr. While investigators are reluctant to say it outright, I don't have to exercise the same level of restraint, so let me say what they won't. All signs point to them having apprehended a serial killer in the making. On the 5th of May, 2019, just 7 days after Alex Davies goes missing, 17-year-old Brian Heelis, criminal genius, is formally arrested and charged with his murder. And apart from answering one question, which his lawyer advises him to retract, his answer to every question he is asked is the same.
Are you responsible for the murder of Alex Davies?
No.
Okay.
Can I just step in? Do you recall the advice I gave you in an interview?
Yes.
We'll start again. Are you responsible for the murder of Alex Davies?
No comment.
That's Alex. Oh, look at that picture. Do you know Alex?
No comment.
Have you ever seen that person before?
No comment.
How do you know him?
No comment.
Do you remember going there on Monday at all?
No
For
comment.
any reason?
No comment.
When we found Alex, he has multiple injuries. Are you responsible for causing those injuries?
No comment.
Are you responsible for murdering Alex Davies?
No comment.
Chapter 6. The Voices. Before we get into the trial, I want to discuss something that has been purposefully left out of the story up to now, because personally, I think it's absolute hogwash. Okay, so this is not the first draft of the script. In the first draft that Sharon sent me, she presented Brian's story very differently. But I felt that we needed to go in a different direction, so things have changed, and this chapter came to be. These are my thoughts on the matter, written by me, and not part of Sharon's script. Between Brian's arrest and his trial, he is admitted to Guild Lodge Hospital, a medium security psychiatric facility in Preston, where he is assessed and then diagnosed and treated for schizophrenia, which is described by the Mayo Clinic as, quote, a serious mental health condition that affects how people think, feel, and behave. It may result in a mix of hallucinations, delusions, and disorganized thinking and behavior. Hallucinations involve seeing things or hearing voices that aren't observed by others, end quote. According to Brian, he hears voices, and when he went to meet Alex that Monday, he took the knife with him for protection. In the original draft of the script, Sharon incorporated Brian's hallucinations into his story when describing the crime. Now, while I will concede that, as we'll get into shortly, Brian was assessed by 4 independent psychiatrists who confirmed a diagnosis of schizophrenia, I'm not convinced. Granted, I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just a YouTuber with a skeptical streak the size of the Suez Canal. But in my opinion, the dude is a manipulative c***, and I would not put it past him to play his strings like an upright bass. This is why I requested that we not include the voices he claimed to hear when relating the story from Brian's perspective. His mental health diagnosis does come up in the trial, but as you will hear, I'm not the only one that thinks it was hyped up to subvert any hope of real justice. The guy is disturbed, of that there is no question, but enough to absolve him? I don't think so. That's a bit of a stretch, in my view. Right, I'm getting off my soapbox. Let's get back to the story. Chapter 7. The Get Out of Jail Free Card. Following Brian's initial court appearance at the Preston Crown Court on the 6th of May 2019, he's admitted to Guild Lodge Hospital in Preston, as previously discussed, where he receives treatment for his aforementioned schizophrenia diagnosis. The trial eventually gets underway on the 17th of March 2020, presided over by the Recorder of Preston, Mark Brown. A jury of 12, 8 women and 4 men, previously selected from an initial group of 19, is sworn in, and as is at the start of the pandemic, the jury is spread out over 3 rows instead of the usual 2, in adherence of social distancing regulations. Everything looks to be good to go, and the jury is instructed not to discuss the evidence they are about to hear with anyone. Judge Brown next calls on Prosecutor David MacLean, QC, who proceeds to address the court, laying out the timeline of events. He then tells the court that although Brian has admitted to killing Alex, he denies committing murder due to, quote, an abnormality of mental functioning at the time of the killing, which subsequently impaired his ability to understand the nature of his conduct or to form a rational judgment or to exercise self-control. End quote. Here's that get out of jail free card he's trying to play. The court breaks for lunch, but when proceedings resume at 2:15, Judge Brown addresses the jury. Quote, I hope you'll understand when I say that we are doing our very best to try and ensure that the justice system can continue to function effectively. We are very mindful of the crisis and very sensitive to the position of those who fall into the group identified yesterday by the Prime Minister. End quote.
As we said last week, our objective is to delay and flatten the peak of the epidemic by bringing forward the right measures at the right time so that we minimise suffering and save life. Now, this advice about avoiding all unnecessary social contact is particularly important for people over 70, for pregnant women, and for those with health conditions, with some health conditions. And I know that many people, including millions of fit and active people over 70, may feel, listening to what I've just said, that there is something excessive about these measures. But I have to say, I believe they are overwhelmingly worth it to slow the spread of the disease, to reduce the peak, to save life, minimise suffering, and to give our NHS the chance to cope.
Judge Brown continues, quote, I'm aware that 3 of you fall into that category, and consequently, I have to be sensitive to your position. It is my opinion that rather than continuing with the trial, a better course of action would be to discharge the jury and allow the trial to start again. End quote. A new jury is impanelled and the trial is rescheduled for the following week, the 20th of March 2020. When the new trial begins again, Mr. MacLean speaks of Brian's diminished capacity defence, telling the jury that they will hear during the proceedings testimony from the psychiatrists who assessed Brian in the months following Alex's murder. But nevertheless, by the end of the trial, he says, the prosecution will prove that the finger points squarely at Brian Heelis, that he is guilty of the offence of murder. The alternative, manslaughter by reason of diminished responsibility, is a matter for psychiatric evidence. The trial takes just 3 days to conclude, including testimony from Brian's psychiatrist, who had him diagnosed with schizophrenia while he was incarcerated at Guild Lodge, and then Judge Brown sends the jury away to deliberate. A quick tangent here. I spend a lot of time on YouTube, and I think perhaps the algorithm has gotten the idea that I'm really into true crime and law-related stuff. Can't fathom why. Anyway, a few months back, this dude happened to wander across my YouTube Shorts feed.
No one can agree. The world is fracturing apart, but every single day in courtrooms all across the country, people from all walks of life and all beliefs come to unanimous verdicts.
Mike Rafi is a personal injury lawyer based in Atlanta, Georgia. So while he doesn't practice in the UK, he does make a good point about juries here, which is relevant to our story.
I have to convince 12 people to all agree to the same thing. Go to your local Walmart, try it. Pick a random question. What's your favorite color? That's a stupid one. Chili's, Applebee's, or Outback. That should be a layup. Everyone should agree. Everyone won't.
This is a fact of life, no matter where you are in the world you are. So how long does he want a jury to deliberate for?
So when I think about how long a jury should be out, if a jury comes back within an hour, I'm very worried. If a jury comes back somewhere in that 4 to 5, that is a good amount of time. Like, that's the right amount of time for everyone to voice what they think and then compromise, work out a potentially unanimous verdict.
So how long did Brian's jury deliberate? Less than an hour. And their verdict? Guilty. Yeah, they didn't buy his "I have mental health issues and the voices told me to" bullshit for a second. See, I told you I wasn't alone in my thinking. You should check out Mike's YouTube channel. He's actually pretty entertaining and apparently a decent lawyer too. There's a link down in the description. Okay, tangent over. Back to our regular programming. At sentencing, Judge Brown describes Brian's crimes like this. Quote, "Alex was a kind-hearted, gentle and hard-working young man who would never have harmed anyone. You lulled him to his death and executed the killing in a savage way. You are undoubtedly setting him up to kill, and you are a manipulative, calculating and devious person. It is extremely fortuitous that you were arrested before anyone else suffered the same fate." End quote. He also laments a life cut short, saying that Alex had just been given a promotion, and now he had been denied the chance of enjoying the fruits of his commitment and effort. Brian is sentenced to life, with a minimum of 24 years to be served before he can be considered for parole. Good, you may think. But wait, there's more. Epilogue, the final insult. We are all aware that the job of police officer is an essential one, very essential, and they deal with all sorts of situations, some mundane and trivial, climbing in severity to murder and mayhem. So, in a way, it can be understandable, I guess, that they are sometimes a little slow to react, in their opinion, to unnecessary panic when they've seen it all. On the 30th of April 2019, a mother, after a sleepless night, reports that her son has been missing overnight. As far as the police are concerned, this falls into the lower echelons of seriousness, because the initial reaction was to tell Bev Davies, you know the youth of today. You know how they behave. He's an 18-year-old adult. I'm sure he just got caught up in the fun and will be home soon. Please don't hesitate to contact us if you need anything else. Go and have a cup of tea, Mrs. Davies, and relax. I'm sure he'll be home soon. I often wonder about human mentality and how we are inclined to stereotype people so quickly. Although a missing persons case had been recorded, I can almost guarantee you that it wasn't flagged for any level of urgency. Even the head of the investigation, Detective Chief Inspector Jeff Hurst, hadn't heard of it. Thankfully, he was seasoned enough to know to get one of his team to check. If only someone had taken the time to acknowledge a mother's instinct. If only someone had taken the time to listen. The problem was that initially the victim was thought to be that of an older female, and it wasn't until the pathologist's report came back that the body was confirmed to be male, and only then does it match the missing persons report. In these modern times, children have so much more freedom and knowledge of the world, thanks to TV, social media, among others, but they are not all streetwise and must live life to learn it for themselves. They must learn to make their own decisions. Did Alex have some kind of inkling that all was not well with this upcoming meeting with Brian? Was that why he didn't share that he had met someone online? Was he waiting to see what came of it before he told anyone about him? Maybe the fact that he was a fairly trusting person, or that he was trying not to live in fear following the mugging incident previously mentioned, convinced him that he was just being silly, that it was not like he was inexperienced around people. He dealt with the public on a daily basis at work, and anyone who has ever worked in retail will tell you that the level of assholery you encounter in that job is beyond compare. When the police arrived at Bev's home to share the news of Alex's murder, she was devastated. She was only too willing to give them any information she could to help find this fiend who had taken her beloved son from her. But she was also willing to do the detective work, if that meant she would get answers. She had been the one to find the CCTV footage of Alex getting into a taxi. She had been the one to contact the taxi company and convince them to share the details of Alex's final trip based on the vehicle registration number that she had been able to pull off the video. This police work was not done by the police, as if we needed any further testament to her mother's love or dedication. Thankfully, the officers of the Force Major Investigation Team were a competent lot, and Detective Inspector Tracy McMurdo was able to trace Alex's steps from the railway station in Parbold to the corner shop where he bought the chocolate and soft drink, and then tracked him down as he crossed the railway bridge on Station Road, after CCTV cameras lost him as he made his way up Parbold Hill between 1:37 and 2 p.m. In one of the conversations that Bev had with Linda O'Day, the host of MTV's True Life Crime UK, she says that there weren't many secrets between her and Alex. She seemed to be aware of who her son was and was quite prepared to provide unconditional love and support. He in turn appeared to be open with her, including her and his wants, needs, comings and goings. In that same episode, Linda calls her mum to ask how she would have felt if Linda just disappeared one day, and based on Mrs. A's response and how Linda reacts after that phone call, the audience is left with the impression that in her youth Linda was a wild one, and Mrs. Ade would worry when Linda disappeared for days on end.
I've just been thinking about my mum and what she would be like if I went missing for a couple of days. So I'm just going to call her now.
Hello.
Hi, Mum. You all right?
Yeah, I'm good.
I've got a quick question, Mum. How worried would you be if I didn't come back home for a few days?
My God, I would be so worried. You have that once. I was really, really terrified.
Really?
It's really frightening. Throughout that night, just forget it. There's no sleep.
He is 18. That's an adult, technically.
That 18 it's just a number, The mother is mother, and that's your child. When it was now getting late, and there's no more calls, no more reply as well, then wow, or anything can happen at any time.
Actually, didn't expect I would feel like this after that conversation. I feel kind of guilty for underestimating how worrying it must be for a mum.
As a former wayward youth myself, I can relate to Linda's reaction to her call with her mum. I put my mum through hell when I was Alex's age, disappearing for months on end. No calls, no texts, just radio silence. Listening to Mrs. Ade talk about the anguish she felt when Linda was off being young and stupid, and thinking back on conversations I've had with my own mum in the years since those wild days, I share Linda's guilt. And that ache is real. Speaking of my mum, Sharon writes here, as the mum of a son much older than 18 now. That would be me. I know that there are times when you miss the point, or the message, or signs, and you live with regret of varying degrees like, now what did you learn then? Or, oops, I missed that. Or, oh shit. Or just plain, fuck. Yeah, I come by my foul mouth, honestly. As parents, we accept the responsibility of protecting our children from harm. And I can only imagine that Bev carries her guilt everywhere, reliving the last moments of her son's life in fear and agony every day, thinking I should have believed in my own instincts more when reporting his disappearance to the police. I should have seen some sort of sign. I should have paid more attention. But that's not always possible, and it's something that true friends and family have to acknowledge, and in the case of a death like Alex, live with, because it's absolutely impossible to get over it. Alex's close friends were horrified at what happened and remained confused as to why he didn't share anything about his last date when he shared everything about the dating sites he was on and what he was doing or what he was planning with him. But let's get back to Brian and what happened in the wake of the sentencing. I told you to wait because there is more. Bev had to wait for almost a year to get justice for his son. The defense that Brian's lawyer put forth was cruel. He acknowledged eventually that he was responsible for Alex's death, but then his lawyers leaned into that schizophrenia diagnosis, claiming that he needed psychological evaluation, which dragged things out and delayed Bev's ability to get closure. Cruel. Just cruel. But the most traumatizing for Bev had to have been finding out 2 weeks after the trial concluded and Brian was sentenced by Judge Brown, who was convinced that Brian's actions were cold and premeditated, to a minimum of 24 years behind bars, that Brian only spent 2 hours in prison. You heard that right. 2 hours. Just 2 hours after beginning his 24-year sentence, a sentence he got because, let's recap, he stabbed Alex 128 times like a fucking psycho, then dragged him through the mud, which blocked Alex's airways so that he asphyxiated to death, and then he cycled home, where he was then hopped onto Grindr to set the trap for his next victim. Just 2 hours after beginning his 24-year sentence for these crimes, his psychiatrist at Guildhall swooped in and whisked Brian off back to the medium security facility, in effect countermanding Judge Mark Brown's order. As Bev told a reporter, quote, "I was told he was off to prison, and it was only weeks after, when the probation service got in contact with me, I was told that he was only in prison for the 2 hours and then he was swept back to Guild Lodge." End quote. When Bev reached out to Alex Chalk, MP, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Justice, she received a letter stating that officials had depended on evaluations from 4 independent psychiatrists. These assessments confirmed that Brian continued to suffer from a mental disorder that necessitated hospital treatment. Mr. Chalk explained that the transfer on the same day, though not unusual but by no means unprecedented, was not under the jurisdiction of the sentencing judge and did not in any way subvert the life sentence he had passed. That is absolute bullshit, as Alan Weston, a reporter for the Liverpool Echo, writes in far less vulgar language than I can muster. Quote, "Despite the court ruling that he should be sent to prison, a decision was overturned not by the justice system in open court, but by doctors deciding in secret and offering no explanation as to why this was allowed." End quote. In our opinion, Sharon and mine, justice has not been served for Brian's actions, and as such, closure for Bev and Alex's friends has been taken from them, just like Alex was taken from them. What kind of person can plan a murder so precisely, take just what they need to carry it out, lure their victim to a suitably deserted meeting place, and brutally and heinously carry out their murder, then go home, plan their next murder, this time with more precision and calmness, only to then plead mental health issues in the hopes of a reduced sentence of manslaughter, if not complete exoneration through acquittal? What kind of justice is there in a system where the case is thoroughly investigated and judgment passed, only to have it undermined by doctors and made not to be carried out to the letter? According to D.R. Tracy McMurdo, she has nothing but admiration for the Davies family, saying, quote, "Alex's family has shown nothing but dignity throughout the investigation and trial. In this horrifying tale, we were able to put the jigsaw puzzle pieces together before there were any more victims." End quote. As Judge Brown stated, Brian Heelis has not only prevented a young, popular, friendly, open, trusting and hard-working Alex Davies from living out the rest of his life into old age, but has ruined the lives of many others who have been left behind. It's very difficult to imagine what they are going through, and hopefully they will eventually be able to move on with their lives. Try to imagine if that is your son or your dear friend. How would you react? If you enjoyed today's episode and you're listening to this as a podcast, please leave a review. I'd love to hear from you. If you're watching on YouTube, how about you give us a like and a follow? And don't forget to hit the bell to get notified when we drop new videos. If you want to show your support, you can sign up as a monthly subscriber over on Patreon, or give a once-off donation at Buy Me a Coffee. The links to both of these are in the description. And for Patreon members, even free members, we have a community chat where you can hang out and shoot the shit with me and the other patrons. So come and say hi. This show is available on YouTube, where you can get the full ACMQ experience, or if you prefer to just listen to me rather than see me, you can find ACMQ on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for A Crime Most Queer. And that's where we leave it. Again, thanks again to Sharon for writing it and the Dreamstream team for recording it, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.